Madam President, the name Hezbollah has become increasingly familiar in recent years to Americans as one of Iran's main proxy groups committed to the destruction of Israel and even the United States. Beyond the horrific bombings of the U.S. Embassy Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon in the 80s, many of us now associate the name with Iran, of course, which has been the principal supporter, financial supporter of Hezbollah to the tune of 70 to 90% of its budget. In return, Hezbollah acts as one of Iran's proxies in the so-called axis of resistance. We all know that Hezbollah is one of the leading terror groups in the Middle East, responsible for numerous violent attacks over the past several decades. But lesser known is their influence in the Americas, specifically in Latin America. Perhaps lesser known is the broad extent of Hezbollah's activities in the Western Hemisphere, which includes illicit drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises. Hezbollah uses these activities to generate cash to help finance terrorism back home in the Middle East. So while many in the West are focused on Iran's proxy terrorism around the world, we cannot afford to ignore our own backyard. Last week, I chaired a hearing for the Senate Caucus on International Narcotics Control to examine the role that terrorist networks have played in creating the drug crisis that we face here in the United States, which has taken hundreds of thousands of lives over recent years. In this hearing, expert witnesses testified about Hezbollah's activities in Central America and in South America, and how they've strengthened drug cartels and other criminal organizations that are actively trafficking drugs into our country across the southern border. This illicit drug trafficking in Latin America is one of Hezbollah's primary sources of income, used to finance terrorism, as I said earlier. As we learned at the hearing, now more than ever, Hezbollah will be looking to increase its cash flow and revenue from drug trafficking and other illegal activities in Latin America as they seek to rebuild from Israel's impressive campaign to rid the world of this terrorist threat. We learned that Hezbollah takes advantage of free trade zones in Central America where they can carry out their illegal operations under minimal law enforcement and oversight. And then there's the tri-border region between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, long known to be a hotbed of terrorist financing, because it has a minimal law enforcement footprint and is a hub for commerce, and it is a black market for all sorts of illicit activities, from drug trafficking to arms trafficking to identity theft and even real estate schemes. Hezbollah, when it comes to its fundraising, like many criminal organizations, is commodity agnostic, meaning they'll do anything for money. The border of these three countries, known as the tri-border region, is isolated and hard to monitor, making it possible for easy transit between them. It boasts a robust network of roads that connect the area to major cities as well as international airports. These attributes, paired with high levels of corruption and lack of good governance, create the perfect petri dish for both illicit and licit trade to flourish. It was in this region in 2008 where the U.S. Operation Titan arrested upwards of 130 suspects and seized roughly $23 million associated with the joint operation between Hezbollah and Colombian cartels that were engaged in cocaine smuggling and money laundering. This operation uncovered about 700,000 wiretapped conversations revealing drug cartels' association with, working hand in glove with Hezbollah. 700,000 wiretapped conversations tying these drug cartels to this terrorist organization. For example, one key cartel leader was known as Taliban and given permission to freely import drugs and launder cash into Lebanon in exchange for a 12% tax on his proceeds paid to Hezbollah. Hezbollah's operations extend to other free trade zones like the Margarita Islands in Venezuela and Macau in Colombia. It was in Macau where Ali Mohammed Saleh, a designated Hezbollah facilitator, led a support cell that raised money for the broader Hezbollah network. His activities included transporting money from Colombia to Hezbollah in Lebanon through Venezuela. The Venezuelan government has openly embraced this illicit commerce and these criminal organizations. At last week's hearing, one of our witnesses described the regime of President Maduro as, quote, a key enabler of Hezbollah's malign activity in the Western Hemisphere. From providing passports to Hezbollah operatives, allowing them to travel more freely, to creating transportation pipelines, to intelligence collaboration, Venezuela has developed a partnership with Iran and Hezbollah, allowing them to finance their terror operations around the world while they engage in illicit money laundering and transportation of drugs and other illegal activities in the Americas. The U.S. Treasury Department has uncovered key evidence that the Maduro regime and Iran are collaborating at the state level. For example, in 2020, Adel El Zabayar, a former Venezuelan official and political ally of Nicolas Maduro, was indicted in the Southern District of New York for facilitating cocaine and weapons trafficking between his own government and Hezbollah. A Venezuelan businessman was also found to have provided resources to Hezbollah, including ideological and military training and networks for illicit trafficking for drugs and weapons. Notwithstanding the impressive work of the UN's intelligence community, Maduro has not exactly been secretive about who his friends and who his enemies are. In 2022, Maduro openly bragged about his exemplary relationship and increasing cooperation with Iran. In an interview, he said, "All of us who fight against colonialism, all of us who fight to decolonize our minds and our people are part of the axis of resistance that stands against the methods of the imperialists for imposing hegemony on the world." Now, if you didn't know that this was the president of Venezuela speaking, you might have mistaken the quote from a leader of Iran or some other state sponsor of terrorism. Or you might have mistaken it for one of America's elite universities or a slogan from one of the pro-Hamas clubs protesting on Columbia's campus, for example, last spring, who pride themselves in resisting Western colonialism. Well, obviously they're all drinking the same Kool-Aid. In addition to aiding and abetting Hezbollah, Maduro has been criminally indicted based on his leadership of the Cartel of the Suns, probably one of the least known cartels. Better known are the Mexican cartels. But Cartel of the Suns is actually headed up by Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. And it includes a network of Venezuelan military officials, including the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Bolivarian National Guard. Named for the insignias in the Venezuelan military officials' uniforms, the Cartel of the Suns, or the Cartel de los Soles, is involved in everything from gasoline smuggling to illegal mining, drug trafficking, and a whole raft of other illegal activities in Central and South and North America. The U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned the Cartel of the Suns this past July for its material support of Tren de Aragua and the Sinaloa cartel and their illegal drug and criminal activity here in the United States. This gives you an idea of how interconnected these networks are that seek to undermine our country and to threaten our people. But not just in America, but also our friends and allies in Central and South America. This is a network that chants threat to Israel, death to Israel, and also chants death to America. We've known for a long time that much of the fentanyl trafficked through our southern border was manufactured using Chinese precursor chemicals. We also know that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have been working in concert for a long time to undermine the West. So it's no surprise that Maduro's despotic regime in Venezuela aspires to join that list as part of the axis of resistance. We should not be shocked when our enemies work together. The crisis of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and other crime in the hands of international criminal networks that the Biden administration ignored at the southern border is another scheme that our enemies have devised to harm the United States. The Biden administration was asleep at the switch, and that's being kind, when it came to the threat of a porous southern border and their open border policies, allowing criminal networks, along with their poison, to be freely transported into the United States and take tens of thousands of lives, and help enrich our adversaries in Iran and Hezbollah. The deaths in America resulting from drug overdose and the violent crime that our people are suffering is not an accident. It's directly connected to this axis of resistance. And while it may be easy to think we can ignore these terrorists in the Middle East because, well, there's an ocean between us and them, the fact of the matter is there is not. They are operating right here in our own backyard. Iran's proxy terrorist operations have contributed to and profited from the instability and corruption in South America that has led to a mass migration crisis in South America and Mexico, which has flooded our southern border with unprecedented numbers of illegal crossings during the Biden administration. This phenomenon, paired with the strengthening of the criminal and drug cartel networks in Latin America, has led to much more criminal activity here in the United States, where street gangs distribute the drugs exported from these countries to America, to our border, then to be distributed across the United States to the detriment of the American people. So the reason this hearing was so important is because we need to connect the dots. We need to make sure we understand the nature of the threat to our way of life. And it's not just about over there, it is about right here in our backyard, that our enemies are collaborating and threatening the safety and security of the American people. Madam President, I yield the floor.